Jane Gazzo, welcome to Australian Musician.
Thank you for having me.
Before we talk about your work in music media, tell me about music in the house growing up.
Lots of ethnic music. I remember growing up as a child. I remember Italian records, lots of Greek records, Nana Mouskouri, Demis Roussos. Although my family is Italian, I don't know why there was Greek records, but my mum loved Demis and Nana, and lots of ABBA.
And when you had your own money, what kind of records were you buying?
I remember when I had my own money, I bought Kiss Unmasked. That was one of the first records I bought. Cyndi Lauper's She Bop and Throbbin' 84, various artists, which featured Quiet Riot, Come On Feel the Noise, Sandy and the Sunsets with Sticky Music, and Van Halen's Jump. What an eclectic mix.
Did you start enjoying music magazines at that point?
I loved music magazines. I was a child who watched Countdown religiously every Sunday evening on the ABC. If I missed an episode of Countdown on a Sunday, I would literally beat myself up because I'd miss all the playground chatter the next day at school. But also I loved it so much, and I became a real avid fan of smash hits. I would buy it, I think it was every Tuesday, because they were featuring the artists that were featured on Countdown a lot of the time. And I loved Australian music, so there was a lot of Australian music in the Australian edition of Smash Hits. And I got to know all the writers. In fact, I even had a letter published in one of the Smash Hits magazines in 1985.
And who were some of the bylines, the writers that you were noticing?
Oh, James Manning, definitely. Eddie Sarafian, I think that's how you say his name. There was also David Nichols, was an avid writer then, and a woman called Ria who answered all the readers' questions. Because of course we didn't have internet then, so you would write to Get Smart, as was the section in the magazine was called, and you would ask her to solve your musical problems or your musical questions.
Was there a singular spark that made you want to work in the music industry?
I don't think there was a singular spark that made me want to work in the music industry, but I think I loved Countdown so much. And Molly Meldrum to me every week presented this really glamorous, wonderful world with musicians. And he also came across as friend to all the musicians, or best mate to all the musicians. And I thought, that's the world I want to be part of. That's where I want to be when I grow up. That's what I want to do. So it wasn't one singular thing, but it was certainly, reading these magazines week to week, looking at these pictures, sticking them up on my wall, and watching the way Molly was every week interviewing the pop stars of the day. I just thought that was the most glamorous job ever, and that's what I wanted to do.
What was your first paid music media job?
My first paid music media job? It could possibly be writing live music reviews for Beat magazine. I couldn't tell you what show it was, but I'm pretty sure it would be a live music review, because I became a regular contributor to Beat magazine and would get paid very, very small amounts. But I'm pretty sure that was my first gig.
You're predominantly a broadcast journalist, radio and TV, although also an author, which we'll talk about later. Started at Triple R, went to Triple J, and then Triple M, very different radio stations. How would you approach an artist's interview with each of those stations?
Oh, yeah, each station has a different audience, so you're always tailoring an interview to the audience that you're either writing for or broadcasting to. So with a Triple J audience, it's a young audience, obviously, and it's fairly easygoing. I think with a commercial audience like Triple M, You know, you're getting straight to the point. You know, you don't have a lot of time on commercial radio to really go in depth with an artist. So you keep it really surface. You stick to the message, whatever it is they're promoting at the time. And I think with BBC interviews, where I spent 4 years, you know, you do have the ability to go deep and quite I guess train spottery in a sense. So yeah, you really do think about the audience. I always had this question in my mind: what's in it for the audience? And that's how I think I approach most interviews that I do.
Yeah, what is the goal? What are you trying to achieve when you interview an artist?
You know, it really depends on the artist you're interviewing. It really does, I think. But apart from thinking about the audience that you're presenting to or writing for, you know, depending on the artist, you know, I've interviewed an artist recently who doesn't give a lot away in interviews, and I think my goal with that particular artist in that interview was to perhaps have him talk about things that got him off his, you know, he had a set, rehearsed answer for everything. And in that particular interview, I wanted to get him off the script, which I managed to do by talking about his family and growing up. And I was proud of myself because, you know, I'd watched so many interviews, and I do a lot of research. I'm quite heavy on the research when I interview an artist. And I saw and heard the way he answers interviews. So I was like, okay, the goal here is to get him off the script. So yeah, for that, for example, that was the goal. I think in a lot of interviews, I just get them trying to talk about what moves them and motivates them. I think working out what motivates and moves an artist it gets you deeper quicker, or gets you to a place where, you know, you're not on brand or on pitch, if that makes sense. I hope that makes sense.
Have you interviewed artists whose music you dislike?
Yes, I have interviewed artists whose music I dislike immensely. And you know what? 9 times out of 10 you come away with an appreciation of that artist. You know, you may not like the music, but they're human beings at the end of the day, and they're artists in a sense, and, you know, it may not be my cup of tea, but it's someone's out there, and that's why I'm interviewing them. And so I generally, you know, I always treat that with respect, and yeah. Still may not like the music afterwards, but, you know, I generally come away with an appreciation for that person.
You went into TV and co-hosted Recovery with Dylan Lewis. It was a show where anything could happen. What did that teach you about interviewing?
What did that show interviewing? God, well, it certainly gave me it threw me in on the deep end, that's for sure, because I was very green. I mean, I had a lot of radio experience by the time I got onto Recovery, but they really threw you in on the deep end, and it was live television, so it taught me that anything can happen and probably will. And so, what a great way to, I guess, you know, learn on the job.
In the early 2000s, you went to London.
Yes.
To work in media over there. What were the differences between UK music media and Australian music media?
Well, I have to say the standard in the UK was a lot higher. It really was a lot higher. So I had to work twice as hard. You know, the standard. I mean, I really noticed that as soon as I got into XFM. You know, I just really had to lift my game, and I'm really grateful for the time there and other British media outlets that I worked at, because it suddenly, you know, I had to go from here to there, you know, and it was great. You know, it's a good learning curve.
As an aside, in London, away from media, you worked as a PA for Courtney Love for a little while. How would you sum up that experience?
How would I sum up working for Courtney Love? Well, put it this way, I lasted 10 days. I think that probably says enough. I had never worked as a PA before working for Courtney Love, and subsequently I've not worked as a PA since.
Back in Australia, you worked on the sound during COVID for Mark Gudinski.
Yeah.
What was the brief for that show? Was it hope that it might become the new Countdown?
Yeah, Michael Gudinski's, I mean, just the honour of working with the late, great Gudinski. I mean, I'd known Michael for many, many years, and he'd always promised me, in fact, it was the ARIA Awards in 1998 where he promised me that we'd work together one day, and surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, I don't know, it took 20 years to actually work with him. But, when I got that call from him and he said, and it was during COVID, lockdown, he said, the music industry has taken a tumble, nobody's performing, no one's earning money, playing live music. I'm going to put together a TV show and I want you to host it. I mean, calls like that don't come every day, and of course I couldn't jump high enough. So to work with Michael and the Mushroom production team, but also to present a television show that was showcasing and documenting music of 2020, and beautifully as well. I mean, gosh, some of the locations that we filmed at, I mean, that was just such an honour. And Michael had been involved in television before. I didn't know this. He had been instrumental in getting up the late 70s, early 80s show Night Moves with Lee Simon. That I had known about. I was too young to watch it, but I had known about Night Moves and the how big it was at the time. And Michael said to me, I've got that bug again to get back into television, and he really wanted the sound to become a permanent fixture, much like Countdown was back in the day. But unfortunately, we lost Michael all too soon, and we got 2 seasons of the sound out, and I was really grateful for that. And I think they're quite. I think they're really special documents of a pretty crazy time in a crazy world, COVID, lockdown, but, we got these great performances from Australian artists, so I'm really proud of that.
You also do interviews for the Australian Music Vault. How important is it for you to consciously document music history?
I think Australian music history is really important. I don't think we place enough importance on getting these stories, and not just from the artists, but people from behind the scenes. And part of the reason why we do these long play series on the Australian Music Vault is to get these stories down and to celebrate these people. Unfortunately, we're losing a lot of great people, and hopefully, getting these stories down is a way of preserving some of our legacies forever.
In 2023, you were awarded Music Journalist of the Year, the Australian Women in Music Awards.
Yeah.
What did that mean to you?
Oh my God, do you know what? When I won that in 2023, I had never won anything in my life for my work, ever. So it was peer voted, and oh my God, it was, it meant the world to me. It meant the world to me because it kind of, I'd done a lot of work in the last 12 months to kind of, I guess, qualify as a finalist for that award. But it was also a nod to my previous body of work. So it was a really special time. Yes, and still the only thing I've ever won, so I'll take it.
Have you felt that you've had editorial freedom in most of the work that you've done?
I feel I've had editorial freedom in most of the work I've done. Probably in commercial radio, you don't have a lot of editorial freedom, just simply because you're working in really tight parameters, and it's get the artist off and get the artist on rather, and get the artist off. But I think in my other work, I've been really, really lucky, and I've worked autonomously a lot of the time. That's thanks to my freelance career. So yeah, I have been really lucky, and the articles I've pitched have generally been printed without too much change. The books I've written, so yeah, I do feel I have that editorial control.
What about as a female writer? Do you feel you've had equal opportunity?
See, as a female writer, no, I don't feel I've had equal opportunity. I think in some instances my being a female has worked against me. Yeah, I've missed out on a lot of jobs being a female, and I say that quite honestly. I'm not I'm not upset or dirty about it, but it is the truth. Yeah, it's a sad reality. Yes, I do think so.
Do you see things changing anytime soon?
Do I see things changing? I don't know. See, because I'm older now than what I was 20 years ago. So is the fact that the work's not there because I'm an older female? I'm not. I would have to ask younger females if they think that they're getting equal opportunity. I don't know, but is it changing? Well, we're certainly placing more emphasis on diversity now, and that goes for gender, cultural and linguistically diverse people, First Nation, So I think we're certainly more aware than ever. But does it still mean you miss out on a gig because of this reason? Potentially, yeah.
What do you think of the current state of music journalism?
The current state of music journalism. Well, yeah. Look, we unfortunately people aren't reading printed matter these days, right? So that's a problem. So we've got shrinking magazines and printed media. That's one thing. So there's not a lot of money in media, but also we've got the introduction of AI. And AI doesn't really do the job of a human. So is the standard going down? I think so, because we've got less money to pay, so we're probably getting a lot more novices on board that perhaps, have spelling and grammar issues potentially, or don't know the history of an artist, or, just are under the pump time-wise, so are not double-checking their work or proofreading their work. So yes, there's a lot of mediocrity in this country when it comes to music journalism, unfortunately. But, having said that, there's a lot of great music journalism too.
What are your most memorable interviews?
Personally, my most memorable interviews personally? Oh my gosh, are you asking from a printed media point of view or just in general?
Well, let's go with printed media.
Printed media. I think one of the articles I'm most proudest of was for Rolling Stone 2 years ago, and it was an article called Finding Their Voice, and I shone a light on women from the 1990s who were very, very big in the 90s, but were then shut down for whatever it was that they were shut down for. In one case, it was because she was seen as too much of a diva, and was worked horrendously, to the point where she said enough is enough. Another artist that I interviewed had a lot of money ripped off from various managers, and another artist, was sacked from the ABC for something that was completely not her fault. So I got to tell these stories for these women for the very first time ever, and that's probably one of my most proudest pieces. In fact, I think that's why I got the Music Journalism Award. It was a piece that needed to be written, I think.
What about advice to young artists leading up to an interview? How can they prepare?
It's funny. I've interviewed so many artists, and something as simple as when's your next gig. A lot of artists don't know when their next gig is, or have to really think about it. So, know when your next gig is. That's something pretty simple. I don't know. Stay on brand. Stay on your messaging. Don't feel like you've got a lot to prove. I don't know. I don't know how artists prepare for an interview really, but we don't bite as music journalists.
When did you realise that you could be an author?
Well, I didn't know that I could be an author, but I'd always wanted to be an author. But it was Alison at Penguin Random House who believed in me and believed that I could be an author when she approached me to write the John Farnham biography in 2015. She said to me, and this is not verbatim, but she said, I want a woman to write this biography because I don't feel a man will give it the consideration that his career deserves. And not to say that a man can't write a John Farnham biography, but what she was looking for at that particular time was something a bit more, what she called, like, she didn't want a cut and paste version of a bio that was churned out. She really wanted, some careful exploration, and I spent nearly a year on that book, and I'm so proud of it. It's gone into a second pressing, and it's a bestseller. So the fact that Alison took a punt on me as a novice at that point, that was amazing. So that just gave me the confidence. Once the Farnham book was out, now I'm on to my third book. So, sometimes it just takes someone to see something in you that you perhaps don't see in yourself.
Your second book, Sound as Ever, a celebration of the greatest decade in Australian music, 1990 to 1999, which you co-wrote with Andrew P. Street. Why did you feel the need to celebrate that decade?
Well, to me, the 90s is the last age of innocence. It really is. It was an era before mobile phones. It was an era before the internet. Yes, I know the internet was in its infancy, but people weren't taking mobile phones to gigs. People weren't documenting every minute of their lives and, taking photos of what they're eating and drinking and doing. So it really was the last decade of innocence in a lot of ways. And I had started this Facebook group called Sound as Ever after the first UMI album, 1992. And, as a Facebook group to celebrate and document that era of Australian music. And of course, we went into lockdown in a month after I'd put the Facebook group together. And so I guess people had a lot of time on their hands to look under their beds and in their garages and in their attics for posters, photos, set lists, and draw on memories from that time, And we were getting so much great stuff on the Facebook group. I thought, gosh, if this Facebook group were to ever disappear or shut down or, I don't know, accidentally be erased or something, we've lost all these really great memories. So I took it upon myself with Andrew to start getting some of the great stories and, copying some of the great images and posters and lost set lists, from certain gigs and documenting that in this book. And I'm really proud of that book. We look at the big day out, we look at some of the great live music venues from each capital city. We've got stories from some of the leading lights of the time. And it's a book that, it's a great snapshot of a really healthy, fertile time in Australian music.
Now you're about to release your third book, A New Motion, on September 4, a book about rock and pop in Australia in the 80s. You would have been very young during the 80s. Why did you decide that you wanted to celebrate that decade?
I wanted to celebrate 80s Australian music because I love it so much. It's still a decade that I still turn back to. I still think our pop stars had personalities, our music we could sing along to, and it's lasted the distance. And there was a tier of Australian bands that I just felt hadn't been really written about before. It's a tier of Australian bands that were really of the decade, that really, once the 1990s kicked in, they didn't really transcend, although many of them now are still on greatest hits tours, those countdown 80s tours. But, bands like Pseudo Echo, Kids in the Kitchen, Boom Crash Opera, Wawani, Machinations, Models, Geisha, Venetians, they hadn't really been written about and or explored in one book. And I really wanted to track down members as well, who, I was having trouble locating on social media, and really find out a lot of the stories behind songs and why certain bands broke up after one or two hits or one or two albums. And I had a lot of fun writing it because it's a really special decade to me. It was one of my formative decades. I'm a countdown kid of the 80s, so these were bands that really meant something to me.
Yeah. Did you get everybody that you wanted?
I got most people that I wanted. The only person I didn't get to interview, who was really elusive, was the guy out of Coup d'Etat. There was Coup d'Etat were a duo out of Sydney. Tina Cross from New Zealand was one half of Coup d'Etat. And then there was a kind of Russian immigrant guy that was the other half, who wrote all the songs. And I managed to track him down in his recording studio in Sydney, and he said, yeah, I'll be part of your book. And then deathly radio silence. Could not get him, no matter how many times I tried, like, to, you know, get him to respond to an email. So I got everybody but him.
Sound as Ever, your second book, is pretty big on social media. It has a life of its own with the fan page. Do you hope for a similar result with this book?
Yeah, hopefully. I've posted about the book in all the 80s appreciation sites, the Australian ones, and the response has been really positive. So hopefully it you know, piques interest in a lot of 80s fans that love those bands, that were going and seeing those bands.
The 80s were not only about the music, but fashion and hair. I believe you got into the spirit of the 80s yourself.
Oh yes, yes. I entered the Boy George competition when I was 10 years old. Boy George lookalike competition, and I won. That's the only other thing I've ever won in my life. But yes, I had a not Choose Life, Frankie Says t-shirt, the hypercolour t-shirt, and bubblegum jeans. Yeah.
The 80s was also a decade of innovation with keyboard sounds. The sounds were just as important as the songs. And bands were creating or delivering sounds that we hadn't heard before. How big a element do you think that was of the 80s?
Well, you know, most of the bands I spoke to, they were so heavily influenced by what British bands in Sheffield, say, like Human League or Heaven 17 were doing at the time, or Gary Newman, you know, especially with the introduction of the synthesizer and what the synthesizer could do. And that was integral to artists like Real Life or Models, for example. You know, Andrew Duffield is such a synth whiz, you know. So it was so integral to the sound. You know, technology, I think of My Sex, you know, computer games. So technology and pop music went hand in hand, especially in the early 80s.
Was there anything you learned in your research that surprised you with this book?
I was pleasantly surprised by so many of the stories that I was told. You know, I was told that Real Life turned down the opportunity to tour with Queen in the UK. The fact that I Hear Motion, the Model song, started out as a kind of Stevie Wonder Superstition kind of rip-off and then found a life of its own. What else did I find out? I found out that Wah-Wah-Nee didn't make it in America because Paul Gray, the lead singer, refused to go to dinner with the head of the record company and his wife, you know, thereby meaning that their record was never worked on ever again in the States. So yes, I found out a lot of great things. Yeah, and the amount of money that was spent on records, you know, to promote them, or, you know, management making crazy decisions that just were just so silly, you know, just things like that. Yeah, it was a period of excess, certainly.
Do you have a favourite band from the 80s?
Oh my God, all of them. I love Pseudo Echo as much as I love Kids in the Kitchen. I love the Models, certainly the early Models stuff. I love Real Life, the early stuff. All the bands I wrote about I love. Yeah, I don't have a favourite.
What about not just the 80s, but bucket list interviews, artists you wish to interview one day?
Artists that I wish to interview. You know what? As unfashionable as he is right now, I would love to interview Morrissey. I would love to spend some time with Morrissey, really unpacking all that stuff that's got him into trouble. I think he'd be a really fascinating subject to interview. I'd love to interview Robert Smith. I've never interviewed him. I think he's quite interesting. And yeah, that would do me just fine.
Are you hopeful or pessimistic about the future of music media?
It's hard to be hopeful when we have things like AI taking our jobs or threatening to take our jobs, and skeleton crews working on even online publications. I'm not super optimistic, to be honest. But then again, humans can do things that machines can't. But it's when those machines take over everything that you start to worry. So I don't know. It's a fine line.
Well, Jane Gazzo, it's been great to chat. I Hear Motion is out on September 4.
It is. I Hear Motion is out September 4.
In all good bookshops, and where else?
And online. You can grab it from Melbourne Books.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Greg.